Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Chloé Marnet-Bassanger, and I'm the team leader for the team of experts of the rule of law and sexual violence in conflict. I'm honored to moderate today's event and would like to thank you for joining us on an important day for the United Nations mandate on conflict-related sexual violence and multilateral efforts to combat this crime. Today, the special representative of the UN Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict, Ms. Pramila Patten, and the Secretary General of the IPU, Ms. Martin Chongong, will sign a framework of cooperation with a view to assist parliaments who are seeking to combat sexual violence in conflict. To honor his endeavor, the Special Representative will nominate Secretary General Chongong as a global champion for the fight against sexual violence in conflict. Today also marks the launch by the Office of the Special Representative of its model legislative provision and guidance on the investigation and prosecution of conflict-related sexual violence. This new tool aims to assist parliamentarians and others engaged in law reform to criminalize sexual violence as a serious international crime in a survivor-sensitive manner. To commemorate today's event, we are also joined by Ms. Lesia Vasilenko, the President of the Bureau of Women Parliamentarian of the Inter-Parliamentary Union and a member of a Ukrainian parliament, and by Ms. Maxine Marcus of Partners in Justice International. Ms. Ghada Wali, the Executive Director of the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, will also join us virtually through a video message. I would now like to give the floor to SRSG Patten. Pramila, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me extend a warm welcome not only to our distinguished participants for today's event, but to those of you from around the world watching and supporting our shared effort in the prevention and response to conflict-related sexual violence. It is a truism that laws influence behavior. Criminal law is not simply a price to be paid by a perpetrator, but also the expression of society's disapproval of forbidden behavior. That is why, since I took office, I have advocated for comprehensive and survivor-sensitive legislation criminalizing rape and other forms of sexual violence in conflict as a war crime, a crime against humanity or a constituent act of genocide, a transnational crime, and a grave domestic crime, in line with the robust normative framework developed at the United Nations Security Council. These laws are important not only to punish perpetrators, but to prevent these crimes from occurring at home. They send a message to would-be perpetrators that using sexual violence is no longer costly. While many states have adopted or improved legislation to respond to conflict-related sexual violence, significant gaps persist. In seeking to close those gaps and in the fight against the scourge of sexual violence in conflict, parliamentarians who are responsible for reviewing, amending, and enacting legislation are important allies. The power to enact laws is one of the most important powers a legislature can wield, and as such, parliaments can play a critical role in shaping prevention and response efforts to sexual violence through legislation, oversight processes, budget allocation, and advocacy. Partnerships are essential to my office's work, and I have always recognized the importance of working with national parliaments. It is in this spirit that today I'm signing a framework of cooperation with the Inter-Parliamentary Union to address conflict-related sexual violence. The IPU has for well over a century been a global forum for parliamentarians to engage in the cause. Their work recognizes the importance of parliamentarians working together for gender equality, human rights, and development as essential to their work. Indeed, conflict-related sexual violence is a crime that sets back the cause of gender equality and the cause of peace. With their influence and power to initiate change, parliamentarians can play a critical role in the prevention and response to conflict-related sexual violence. The framework of cooperation that we're signing today has 7 shared pillars of work. Some of its key provisions include working jointly to raise awareness amongst parliamentarians on the need to address conflict-related sexual violence and its causes, advocate for the implementation of national laws to promote and protect the rights of all individuals affected by or at risk of this crime, provide concrete technical assistance to member parliaments on the drafting of such laws, and empower survivors and those impacted by conflict-related sexual violence in their country's legislative processes. The framework will be available on our respective website after today's event. Engaging powerful men with the ability to lead, influence, and affect change to step up beside women to take action on conflict-related sexual violence is an untapped opportunity. My office is today naming Secretary General Chung Gong as a global champion for the fight against sexual violence in conflict. It is also fitting that today my office will also launch a model legislative provisions and guidance on the investigation and prosecution of conflict-related sexual violence, a new tool to assist states seeking to enact new laws on conflict-related sexual violence or amend existing ones. Adoption of these model legislative provisions and guidance by parliamentarians in national jurisdiction will be a meaningful step towards fulfillment of the priorities set out in the framework of cooperation. While Mrs. Maxine Marcus of Partners of Justice International, who supported my office in the development of these model legislative provisions, will speak in more detail about these provisions, I wanted to highlight just a few points. These model legislative provisions and guidance are intended to be a practical tool that will allow member states to build and bolster accountability frameworks for conflict-related sexual violence at the national level, and to ensure the highest standard of victim and survivor-centered justice. They were developed looking at both international law and comparative practice in domestic law on conflict-related sexual violence from 28 countries, representing every UN regional group. They were designed and consulted with a range of practitioners, academics, civil society, and most importantly, survivors, including those who have participated in justice process. We have also strived to be as progressive as possible on the range of crimes included, but also on procedural and evidentiary provisions to reduce barriers to justice survivors and victims of conflict-related sexual violence, while always respecting due process. The model legislative provisions will be available in English on the office website after today's event, but over the course of the summer, we'll be translating these provisions into other UN languages. Ladies and gentlemen, there have been many commitments made about addressing conflict-related sexual violence, but we must translate commitments into concrete actions and results. This new framework of cooperation with the Inter-Parliamentary Union and the model legislative provisions and guidance are intended to further our ability to convert cultures of impunity for these crimes into cultures of deterrence and prevention. Thank you.
Thank you, SRSG Patton, for these remarks. I would now like to introduce the Inter-Parliamentary Union Secretary General, Mr. Martin Chung Gong. Secretary General Chung Gong has been working in Parliament of Cameroon for over 14 years and then spent 2 decades contributing to the work of the IPU. He is the first African to be the Inter-Parliamentary Union Secretary General. As Special Representative Patton has mentioned, he has been recognized as an international gender champion and has dedicated his life to causes of peace and governance. I give the floor to the Secretary General Chung Gong.
Thank you very much, Chloe, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and my dear friend Pramila, it gives me great pleasure to have the opportunity to celebrate and officially seal the long partnership between the global parliamentary community and the special representative on sexual violence in conflict. The signature of this framework of cooperation comes at a very crucial time. With the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, the need to prioritize this agenda and join forces in the prevention of and response to conflict-related sexual violence is as urgent as ever. The pandemic has revealed and aggravated gender-based violence against women and girls, including sexual violence. The risks are likely higher for women and girls in context of conflict, violent extremism, terrorism, displacement, and migration. Moreover, the COVID-19 pandemic has also exacerbated shortcomings related to protection and the provision of essential services and community support to survivors, and has limited access to justice. So, if we ask ourselves, why is the framework of cooperation agreement important? And what role is the IPU proposing to play? I see this agreement as a major instrument in building a better tomorrow and mobilizing for a gender-responsive post-COVID recovery through the work of parliaments. The agreement reaffirms the importance of deploying the untapped potential of parliaments and parliamentarians to address the scourge of sexual violence in situations of armed conflict. It recognizes the fact that parliamentarians are central in adopting a strong normative framework aimed at guaranteeing the safety of survivors and ensuring sexual offenders' accountability. It will also be a critical tool to strengthen the IPU's work with parliaments on implementing the Women, Peace and Security Agenda and in supporting parliamentary action in situations of conflict, peace-building processes, and in the post-conflict reconstruction period. To address the root causes of sexual violence, including structural gender-based inequality and discrimination, poverty, and marginalization. I think that parliamentarians are important in the fight against sexual violence in conflict, and I would like to echo what Pramila said in her introductory remarks. Why are they important? First, parliaments have a responsibility to review and adopt laws, and to do so critically in a spirit of continuing evaluation and improvement. I welcome the launch today of the model legislative provisions on the investigation and prosecution of conflict-related sexual violence and its associated legislative guidance. Through our agreement, we will encourage parliaments to use this cutting-edge tool in their efforts to strengthen their national normative frameworks. Parliamentarians are also there to scrutinize budgets, and I think you mentioned that, Pramila, to ensure that adequate financial and human resources are allocated to the effective implementation of legislation. We believe that monitoring and evaluation mechanisms should be based, at least in part, on parliamentary oversight. Parliaments can play a key role in monitoring and overseeing the implementation of action plans on the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, as well as laws on gender equality and the elimination of sexual violence. In accomplishing that task, parliamentarians must work hand in hand with civil society. And that is why I deeply appreciated your insistence, Pramila, on partnerships between parliamentarians, civil society, the UN, and governments. And we want to see these partnerships promote access to information and data on which action can then be taken. They must also listen to, parliamentarians must also listen to survivors and include their voices as well as those of the specialized organizations that support them. Survivors' needs must be well understood and fully met. Only then will more women feel safe to report violence and seek justice. Parliaments need to guarantee the active participation and leadership of women in all fields, specifically in enhancing global security, peace, and stability. Much of the promise of inclusive and women-led peace processes is unfulfilled. Women continue to be excluded from peace and security processes due to discriminatory laws, social stereotypes, and institutional obstacles. Male political leaders should also be engaged as transformative agents of change for gender equality alongside women. Ending gender-based violence is closely related to changing harmful attitudes and embodying a new social construct of nonviolent men and healthy relationships built on mutual respect. As the chair of the International Gender Global Champions Board, I have made a commitment to be such an agent of change and encourage other men to do the same. The IPU's work in the area of conflict-related sexual violence is multifaceted. The IPU has long advocated for parliaments to take action in the area of conflict-related sexual violence, as well as on ending violence against women and girls more generally. There are many examples out there of what we have been doing, and I'm very pleased that today we are being joined by Lesia Vasylenko, the newly elected president of the Forum of Women Parliamentarians, and she will tell you that that forum has been very instrumental in drawing attention of parliaments to UN Security Council resolutions on women, peace and security, and the widespread and systematic use of sexual violence as a weapon or tactic of war. Through our internal gender mainstreaming mechanisms, this work has also influenced and infused the work of Standing Committee on in International Peace and Security, and the High-Level Advisory Group on Countering Terrorism and Violent Extremism. And there are lots of resolutions out there that are providing political guidance to parliaments on how they can effectively work to stem the tide of gender-based violence, especially in conflict contexts. At the national level, and I echo what Pramila and I were discussing yesterday, the IPU and your office, OSRSG, have been working to strengthen capacity in national parliaments in Egypt, Mali, Tunisia, for instance, where we are working with the national parliaments to adopt specific laws to combat violence against women and girls. In Djibouti, for instance, we supported a multi-pronged effort to strengthen gender equality and address violence against women and girls by training MPs in ending violence against women and girls and helping create a caucus of women parliamentarians. And then if we move on to Sierra Leone, another country where we have an issue with female genital mutilation, we're able to foster the creation of a parliamentary caucus that would help to fight this scourge in that particular country. And it is a caucus that brings together men and women to strengthen their ability to deal with FGM in their various constituencies. So, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say that there are manifold actions out there that we want to carry out in order to ensure that sexual violence in conflict is fought with all the vigor it requires. And you, Pramila and myself, we had the good fortune of addressing a letter to the Speaker of the Parliament of Somalia to discourage legal setbacks and serious breaches of international and regional standards relating to rape, other forms of sexual violence, and harmful practice of child and forced labor. We're continuing that dialogue with a view to helping that parliament reconsider the bill on sexual offenses in order for that bill to be in line with the government of Somalia's commitments to strengthen its prevention efforts and response in relation to sexual violence. These are just a few examples of what we have done and what we could do in order to harness the potential that parliaments have to contribute in a robust manner in the campaign to stem the scourge of sexual violence, especially in conflict contexts. Today, I think that the stakes are very high, the demands are multiple, and I'm convinced that the framework of cooperation that we're signing today will give us additional impetus to prosecute our joint work together in this noble endeavor of protecting the rights of men and women, especially in conflict situations. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Secretary General, for your word, but more importantly, for your commitment. I think it was clear from your intervention that parliaments have a pivotal role to play in the fight against sexual violence in conflict. And I now, to dig a little bit deeper in this, have the pleasure of introducing Lesia Vasilienko, who is the newly elected president of the Bureau of Women Parliamentarian of the Inter-Parliamentary Union. The Bureau of Women Parliamentarian ensures that women's issues and gender equality are mainstream throughout Inter-Parliamentary Union's work. Ms. Vasilienko is a member of the Parliament of Ukraine, a lawyer by training, and has been committed to the cause of equality, human rights, and sustainable development for all. Ms. Vasilienko, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chloe. It is my great pleasure to address you all today in my new capacity as the newly elected president of the Bureau of Women Parliamentarians of the IPU. And it is even a greater pleasure to speak today on a topic very much close to my heart, as before becoming a member of parliament, I chaired the veterans' rights organizations and worked directly with victims of sexual abuse in the military and of sexual violence in conflict. As the IPU Secretary General just mentioned, the Bureau and Forum of Women Parliamentarians provide a formal mechanism for women to influence the decisions made at inter-parliamentary forums. We know that armed conflict has a different and disproportionate impact on women and girls. Whenever peace and security issues are discussed at the IPU, the Forum of Women MPs calls on parliaments to be guided by UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and related resolutions on women, peace and security. We always remind our parliamentary colleagues that there must be specific measures in place to protect the rights of people experiencing sexual violence in conflict situations and to provide reparations for violations of their human rights. Second, that women must be part of the resolution of conflict and post-conflict recovery. Third, that women's empowerment and gender equality will bring about sustainable peace. We are profoundly convinced that parliaments can play a fundamental role to narrow the gap between the commitments of the women, peace and security agenda and the currently weak political and financial support worldwide to implement it. The cooperation agreement and the model legislation on conflict-related sexual violence will greatly help us in our work. I am convinced that it will allow us to identify good practices and address many challenges. I would like to make a few comments on two areas on which we should focus our attention and our actions. First, parliamentarians should be accountable for the rights of survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. As parliamentarians, our legislative power comes with the responsibility of ensuring that the rights of conflict-related sexual violence survivors are promoted and protected by law. We must safeguard a strong legal framework which addresses all forms of sexual violence and includes provisions on prevention, protection, and support for the survivors and prosecution and punishment of the perpetrators. This is an essential step in overcoming this scourge and sending a strong message that such violence will never be tolerated. Without good survivor-centered and well-implemented laws, survivors have no formal way to receive physical and legal protection, holistic medical and psychological support, reintegration and rehabilitation services, and restitution from the perpetrators. putting laws and policies into practice remains a significant challenge. Our aim must be to create appropriate mechanisms and to provide adequate financial and human resources. Success on those fronts depends a great deal on the capacity of state institutions and political will. Parliamentarians can have influence in this regard. Second, parliaments need to ensure the active participation and leadership of women in all fields, specifically in enhancing global security, peace, and stability. The rationale for this is not just equity and rights, but also because it drives stronger governance and better outcomes. Academic research in international relations points to a robust correlation between peace agreements signed by female delegates and durable peace. Agreements signed by women show a significantly higher number of provisions aimed at political reform, as well as higher implementation rates for provisions. In post-war situations, women are a driving force for peace and post-conflict reconstruction. The task before us is immense, and with a pandemic at an unprecedented scale, scarce resources may slip away from those who need them the most. The road to fulfilling the promise of the Women, Peace and Security agenda may be challenging. Unprecedented crisis may set us back from progress made in recent years. But this cooperation agreement and the model legislation on conflict-related sexual violence will create new opportunities to learn from each other, to share our struggles, to support one another, and to take bold, sustainable actions for a better tomorrow. We look forward to working with you on very concrete actions. Hand in hand, side by side, we can inspire the change we wish to see in our societies. I thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Lesia. And we also very much look forward to working with you in your new role as president of the IPU's Bureau for Women Parliamentarian. Unfortunately, the executive director of the UN Office Drugs and Crime, Ms. Gada Wali, couldn't be with us today, but she felt important to share with us a video message. UNODC is a member of the United Nations Action Against Sexual Violence in Conflict Network and has worked consistently with both the Office of the SRSG on Sexual Violence in Conflict and the Inter-Parliamentary Union in the fields of legislative and policy reform at the national level. We will now listen to her message.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to address this event to advance the fight against sexual violence in conflict. Congratulations to Special Representative Patton on the launch of the model legislative provisions and on the new cooperation framework with the Inter-Parliamentary Union. As a member of the UN Action Network, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime is proud to have contributed to the model provisions. Sexual violence in conflict is a hideous crime against people when they are most vulnerable. It marks the lives of victims and their loved ones forever. UNODC has long-standing experience in strengthening survivor-centered approaches and criminal justice responses to sexual violence. As part of our work to prevent and counter terrorism, human trafficking, violence against women, and violence against children. In Nigeria, we have partnered with the UN team of experts on rule of law and sexual violence in conflict to deliver capacity building training to over 350 criminal justice officials on accountability for sexual and gender-based violence committed by Boko Haram. In Iraq, we provide essential legal and psychological support to victims of terrorism, including those affected by sexual violence, and we are mentoring Iraqi law enforcement officials to correctly identify and investigate cases of trafficking in persons for sexual exploitation. UNODC is also working with the Office of Counterterrorism and IPU to develop model legislative provisions that will help ensure that victims of sexual violence by terrorists are recognized as victims of terrorism and receive adequate support. I'm grateful to the Special Representative's Office for their contributions to these efforts, which are also informed by the model provisions being launched today. Going forward, UNODC remains committed to working with governments, parliamentarians, criminal justice practitioners, civil society, and all our partners to help align responses to sexual violence in conflict with international standards, guided by the needs and rights of survivors. Thank you.
We will now proceed to the signature of the framework of cooperation between the Office of the Special Representative for Conflict-Related Sexual Violence and the Inter-Parliamentary Union.
On behalf of my office, I am honored to sign the framework of cooperation agreement with the Inter-Parliamentary Union.
I am honored to sign this framework of cooperation with the Office of the Special Representative of the UN Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict.
Special Representative Patton will now nominate Secretary General Chung Hong as the global champion for the fight against sexual violence in conflict.
Secretary General Chung Hong, it's my great privilege and honor on behalf of my office to name you as one of our global champions for the fight against sexual violence in conflict. Your remarkable work in the area of gender equality has been recognized by many, especially the success you have had and continue to have breaking down gender barriers and to make gender equality a reality in many national parliaments. Allow me to also congratulate you for the inaugural SDG 5 Male Champion for Change Award bestowed upon you on International Women's Day this year. Gender inequality is both a cause and consequence of conflict-related sexual violence. It is the invisible driver of conflict-related sexual violence. Prevention of conflict-related sexual violence demands that we adopt a holistic approach that deals with both its root causes as well as its consequences. The constituency advocating for the prevention and response to conflict-related sexual violence has historically been a struggle for women by women. Secretary General Chung Hong, allow me to tell you how you symbolize the example of men stepping up beside women and men taking responsibility with women to accelerate gender equality. This title of Global Champion is in recognition of your important work over the years on gender equality, human rights, the promotion of dialogue and conflict resolution, as well as your unwavering commitment to support my mandate through this framework of cooperation and to lead with advocacy and action within IPU and externally on the eradication of sexual violence in conflict. I wish I could deliver this honor in person to you. Nevertheless, I look forward to the many opportunities that we will have to work together under our new framework. Thank you.
Dear Pramila, dear SRSG, I am really overwhelmed with emotion. I feel deeply humbled by this recognition and award today. I see it as not a recognition as such, but as a stimulus, as an encouragement for me to continue to do what we, in our own modest way, are doing in the interest of humanity. Sexual violence, especially in conflict situations, is simply unacceptable. And it is our bounden duty as leaders, as decision makers, to work together hand in hand in a spirit of partnership, as we mentioned earlier in our introductory remarks, to stem this scourge once and forever. And I see in your office, Pramila, the potential to help parliaments, to mobilize parliaments in support of global efforts to fight this scourge. I want to use this recognition today to pledge that I will more robustly mobilize parliaments within the IPU, but globally, in order for them to walk every step of the way with us and the United Nations in support of efforts that would effectively combat the scourge of the century, sexual violence in conflict. I want to also use this recognition to mobilize all the networks where I am actively involved, the International Gender Champions, the Partnership for Maternal, Newborn and Child Health, and national institutions, so that together we can work in that spirit of partnership, bringing together civil society, legislators, executives in an effort to fight effectively violence against women in conflict situations. I want to thank you, Pramila, for thinking of me, for honoring me with this recognition. And I just want to let you know that I will not fail you. I would like to use this confidence you have placed in me to continue to spur concrete action at the international, global, but also at the national level where it counts. Every woman, no girl is less significant than another human being. We all have the duty to protect every human being on this earth. And it is our duty to always give a human face to whatever we are doing as the international community. And you can count on me and the Inter-Parliamentary Union to move this agenda forward in the right direction. Thank you very much once again to you and the UN for bestowing this award on me. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now, building on the signature of the framework of cooperation and the nomination of a new global champion for the fight against sexual violence in conflict, the Office of the Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict is launching its model legislative provision on investigation and prosecution of conflict-related sexual violence. One of the key individuals who supported the office in developing these model legislative provision is Ms. Maxine Marcus of Partners in Justice International. Ms. Marcus is an international prosecutor and investigator with 2 decades of experience seeking accountability for serious international crimes and crimes of conflict-related sexual violence. She currently works as a founding partner in Justice International, where she provides support to local practitioners to ensure accountability for international crimes in their own court. I give Maxine the floor to speak and present to us the model legislative provision. Maxine, over to you.
Thank you so much, Chloe. What an honor to be here. Imagine, if you will, telling survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, you can have access to justice in this jurisdiction, even if you do not have medical documents, even if you did not report right after the incident, even if you do not want your identity revealed to the public, even if you cannot identify the individual or direct perpetrators. Imagine telling survivors, you can have access to justice in this jurisdiction, and you will have agency in the process. Decisions will be yours, or taken after consultation with you, and you will be treated with respect. Imagine telling survivors, you can have access to justice in this jurisdiction, and the totality of the harms against you will be adjudicated. You will be served by the justice process, not sacrificed to it. This vision of victim and survivor access to justice and empowerment is one step closer to reality today. My name is Maxine Marcus. I am the director of Partners in Justice International. It has been a sincere privilege for PJI, including my co-director, Kathleen Roberts, and our legal consultant, Marie-Audrey Girard, to draft these model legislative provisions and guidance on behalf of SRSG Patton and her outstanding team. PJI provides technical, case-based support to national prosecutors, investigators, and victim representatives who are working to investigate and prosecute conflict-related sexual violence and other international crimes in their own national courts. We are career practitioners in international criminal law, so the support we provide is always peer-to-peer. Through the course of our work, we have seen that our peers often face the same challenges in bringing justice for conflict-related sexual violence crimes, whether they work in civil law or common law jurisdictions. They often ask, how do we prosecute sexual violence crimes as international crimes in our own national courts and under our legislation? They often ask, how do we prosecute superiors for sexual violence committed by their subordinates? They ask us, how do we prosecute cold cases, crimes of sexual violence which took place many years ago, sometimes decades, where we do not have medical documentation? And they ask, how do we help victims and survivors to trust us and come forward to seek justice? When SRSG Patton developed the concept of model legislative provisions on conflict-related sexual violence, we knew that this tool could form the foundation for accountability for conflict-related sexual violence worldwide. After all, we know that there are innumerable obstacles blocking the path toward justice for survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. Survivors who don't have access to proper medical or psychosocial care or support are often later considered less credible because their testimonies cannot be corroborated by hard scientific documentation. Survivors who are targeted by the authorities for sexual violence are often later criticized for failing to report to those very authorities. Survivors who are rejected by and isolated from their own families and communities are often later accused of being untruthful because it took them so long to come forward with their testimony. Survivors who live with stigma placed upon them by the community around them, who live with diseases or other physical disabilities resulting from the sexual violence, often resist medical treatment, often until the harm is irreparable. Survivors are often blamed for the harm, blamed for not seeking justice, and then ultimately, when they do, sacrificed to the aims of the judicial process. Through the promulgation of these model legislative provisions and guidance, the Office of the SRSG on Sexual Violence and Conflict seeks to reverse this inequity, to tear down the obstacles and ensure that victims have the support they need to access justice in a meaningful way. To the victims and the survivors, this tool is ultimately for you. You have the right to seek justice without fear of punishment within your own justice system. And we designed these provisions with you foremost in our minds. Indeed, several survivors provided expert feedback on early drafts, for which we are profoundly grateful. We encourage member states to enact these provisions. In doing so, states will send a powerful message to survivors that they will be supported in seeking justice, that they will have their day in court. Equally powerful, states will be sending a message to perpetrators, past, present, and future, that they will be brought to justice. Thank you so much.
you, Maxine, for these remarks and presentation, and thank you for your support and work on this very important new tool for the office, as well as parliamentarian and practitioners. As a reminder, the new framework of cooperation will be available on the websites of both the Office of the Special Representative and the Inter-Parliamentary Union. Additionally, the Office's model legislative provision and guidance on the investigation and prosecution of conflict-related sexual violence will also be uploaded for everyone to be able to avail themselves of this new important landmark tool. We will now close today's event. We all thank the participants for their remarks today, and on behalf of the Office of the Special Representative and the Inter-Parliamentarian Union, we would also like to thank those of you who joined us and who support our shared work on eliminating conflict-related sexual violence in all of its form. I wish you a good day.